1759 Siege of Quebec. This is a solitaire game about the conflict described in the title. You can play it in two variants actually. You can play it as the French against an AI controlling the British, or as the British against an AI controlling the French. In both cases, the AI is represented mainly by a deck of cards. The game also has a two-player option, but I'll leave it to you to discover that one. Now, the game here is in its second edition, and in 2019 I reviewed the first edition. Gameplay is basically the same. The changes do not impact the overall experience of playing the game. Matter of fact, I rewatched my conclusions from 2019, and after playing the second edition, I agree with those conclusions. They still apply. So if you want to know what I think about gameplay of the second edition, just go and watch my conclusions for the first edition. So this video is going to be mainly a component review. I will tell you about the differences in gameplay, but again, with the caveat already that I don't think they impact the experience much. At least they did not impact my experience with the game. What changes is the components, so I'll show you those. But still, the biggest change in the rules is about the guns. Guns were abstracted by game effects entirely during in the first edition. Now they are represented by game effects and game pieces. You have 3 British guns represented by round pieces and 2 French guns represented by equally round pieces that go there at the beginning of the game. All that they do really is to give you a limited access to certain actions and a limited amount of times that certain game effects may hit. Basically, there was a game effect back in the day in the original game that would inflict a loss on the British, and now that's a loss on the gun, so when that loss is taken, you remove the gun. But that game effect, if it hits after all guns have been removed, is no effect. So basically, what was a loss for the British that could have happened any number of times in a game now can happen up to 3 times. And there was a no effect result in the original game that now is a hit on the French guns, and again, after that hits twice, it again becomes no effect. And again, there are certain other conditions that apply only if you have guns. So basically, it turns an unlimited group of options and results into a limited one. But other than that, the overall flow remains the same. And just to summarize, remains that for the British, the experience is fairly scripted because in order to win, you need to move ships from the lower St. Lawrence to the upper. You need to use those ships to move troops into Abraham, and you need to attack Quebec from Abraham. And that's really the idea. You win as the British if you deplete the morale of the opponent, or if you empty Quebec of enemy troops. But the only way to do so is to go through those steps exactly and in that order. As the French, you have more things to do. Your job is to survive until at the end of the deck without going down to 0 morale, or even better if you can get the British morale down to 0. So that general flow, the flavor of the game remains the same. Now, as for the components, the biggest changes are in the board. I guess also the covers. The covers of the 2 editions are pretty different. And, well, that will come down to personal taste, I believe. I don't strictly have a preference one way or the other when it comes to the box art. I think they're both pretty neat. When it comes to the board, that is a main difference to me, that really impacts the experience of playing the game, because you'll be looking at the board the whole time. Literally, it is a board game. And, well, I'm set to report that I like the old map much better. Incidentally, you can hear me brag about in 2019 about how much I love the original art. It's more detailed, yes, it's darker in the overall composition, but it has a realistic feel. It looks like a military map, or in any case, a kind of map that a commander at the time may have looked at as they were making their decisions. I just like the feel. It's still very clean, very practical, but also very thematic and immersive. The new map is much lighter, cleaner. I was gonna say cartoonish, but that's the wrong word. But it feels less realistic and more abstract. It feels a lot more like, well, the board of a game, but this one felt like a real map that was also playable. So personally, I like the old map a lot more. And you may say it's easier to read, but not by a little bit, but not by a lot, because the old map was perfectly good enough. I guess a changing graphic, of course, is that the French pieces used to be blue and now they're white, and also Indian troops used to be blue and now they're green. But just the fact that the map is a lot less detailed, to me, that's a bit of a hit. And it seems to me that's to be the biggest change in graphics and aesthetics, that the visuals are lighter and simpler now. I'm gonna put down the camera so then now I can show you some of the other components. The rule books, now the illustration on the box also is on the cover of the rule book, so the rule book has a cover. And again, I hadn't played the game since back then, so I relearned it from the rule book. I didn't have any problem. The rule book was definitely effective. Didn't have any problem there. Again, the overall graphics, as you can see, they're lighter because you don't have those thick lines separating the paragraphs anymore. The background of the examples is more subdued than it used to be. But again, you don't have these big bold separators between paragraphs. It's just lighter on the eyes, I guess. That's maybe a way of putting it. Maybe more responsible environmentally. They're using less ink, but that definitely seems to be the way that the aesthetics are going. When it comes to the order books, same idea. The overall colors are lighter, but there's also more detail. The illustration is definitely a lot more interesting here. Although again, this one feels more realistic, more like, oh, that's the folder where I'm keeping my notes as a French commander of the 18th century. And the pattern remains, that the colors are more subdued. You don't have such fairly vivid colors in the background that kind of stand out. The overall, it looks cleaner. Again, this is the new version. This is the old version. It looks cleaner, which to me is great, again, when it comes to the play area. Everywhere in the board, I like the lighter, cleaner graphics, but for the board, I vastly prefer the old one. And the same thing applies here, of course. Hey, there's a consistent restyling of the graphics and the art. And the box falls, the lead falls, and that's totally okay. There you go. Now, when it comes to not the box lid, but the boxes themselves, exactly the same size. One difference is now the box comes with this plastic insert that also has a lid to store your components. Again, the biggest change in the wooden game pieces is the color of the French. And when it comes to the cards, the graphic in the back is, again, lighter and simpler now than it was before. And here I placed the two versions of 3 cards from back in the day, from the first version, first edition and second edition. And the idea remains. Fewer of these blocks standing out, a more consistent look with the color frame, but the illustrations are the same. And the game is basically the same. So, this is it. This is my review, my comparative review and assessment for 1715 Siege of Quebec. The game is basically the same. It looks, has lighter, less obtrusive, if that's the word, less intense graphics, which is, to me, to my personal taste, welcome everywhere but for the map. I guess that if I were to play it in the future, I'd probably use the old map and then everything else. But I have to tell you, gameplay that, was good enough in 2019. After playing another game in the system, Siege of Malta, 1565 Siege of Malta, then this old system just is not as attractive as it used to. 1565 Siege of Malta, and if you watch my review for that one, just adds the interesting idea of a limited amount of actions to the old system. Now you have to spend action to refresh actions. That gives the experience a whole different flavor. It makes for a very interesting cycle of decisions. And I missed it going back to 1759 Siege of Quebec. I missed that. Just being able to select the same action over and over and over and over and over and over again just wasn't as interesting anymore when I see a better version. Anyways, this is it. This is my assessment for the second edition of 1759 Siege of Quebec.